So Bugfight is pretty fun, but it's not there yet. Really, one of the biggest problems I'm hitting now is knowing what the problem is. So to talk about that, I should probably explain the rules. I appreciate those of you that wrote in with comments and questions. I think a lot of those questions will be answered as we go through some of the rules here, but just to make sure I'm covering all of them. Drip NZ said that notably they're interested in things like the resource system, the card economy, and conflict resolution. In other words, how do you determine the winner of a lane? I'm going to cover all that. Flogan711 said, talk about making the math work, please. I don't know that the math totally works yet, but we'll talk about that for sure. James York, hi James, asks, what software did you use for prototyping, i.e. card layouts? I'm using an Adobe Illustrator template that I made myself. More on art later. AMB Bakery asks, a good question. What would I say are the defining characteristics of a lane battle or tabletop game? And then what mechanics or scenarios make the examples you chose in the video compelling? I think one of the defining characteristics of a lane battler for me, and why I chose to design one, is with a lane battler, you have this really legible, palpable sense of drama as maybe one player starts to get really close to winning a lane and maybe wins that lane and starts to win several points, or as one player maybe upsets the balance of one lane such that maybe they're trying to win a little bit more. If you don't know how lane battlers work, this will all make sense in a second. But I love that really legible sense of drama, in that sense that you can just look at the table and immediately judge, wait a minute, they're about to win here, I'm about to win here. Makes for a good story. I like stories. Thanks so much for those questions. If you have any more questions at the end of this video, especially after I do the rules overview, please ask those in the comments. But let's get to explaining the game. I'll need a different camera angle. I should start by explaining how you win. So there's two main types of cards in the game. These that I have in black sleeves are the bug cards. Each player starts with a hand of bugs. There's also more bugs you can recruit during the course of the game. The other ones with these red backs are the area cards. And you'll notice that at the beginning of the game, you deal out 3 areas to start with. In the top right corner of each area card, you'll see this yellow number. This number represents the amount of victory points that that card is worth at the end of the game. Players are going to be playing bugs to these 3 lanes to try to capture these areas, and then at the end of the game, players count up however many victory points they have across all of the areas that they've captured. Once a player captures one of these areas, they put it in front of them, and then a new area is drawn from the top of the area deck, and that fills in that spot. Dealt into the last 4 cards of the area deck somewhere is this flag. Once this flag is captured, the game is immediately over, and whoever has the most victory points from their area cards wins. So at the beginning of the game, once all those area cards are dealt and the flag is shuffled in the bottom 4 cards of the area deck, you're going to take your deck, which includes these bugs, and then these 3 weird rest cards. Set those rest cards off to the side for now. Those are going to start in your hand. And then you're going to shuffle up your deck of bugs. You'll draw 3, put those in your hand, and then set the rest of those other bugs in a draw deck off to the side. And now you're ready to go. So the first thing you'll do is you'll look through your hand. So you'll notice, other than the 3 rest cards in my hand, I have an ant, I have a locust, and I have another ant. So kind of like Pokemon or Magic, the different bugs are split up into colored energy types. The ant is a dirt and the locust is a leaf. They're also flower and water. And they each have a power value listed up here in the top left-hand corner. What I'm going to do at the same time as my opponent is I'm going to choose 3 cards from my hand to lay down at the areas. So let's do that now. So as you can tell, you don't take turns in this game. Both players put down their cards simultaneously. They have all the time they want to make those decisions, but once they're locked in and you start revealing cards, you can't actually change the cards that you've played to each lane. Before I reveal the bugs that were played at each of these lanes, let's take one more look at these area cards. So you'll notice, for example, let's look at the trash card. Here, the 4, wow, my hand is so big. What a cool perspective trick. So you'll notice the trash card is going to give 4 victory points to whoever can win it. The way that they win that card is by playing a number of bugs in the column under that area that equal to or exceed that card's capture value. Now, we need to check and see what bugs were played to these lanes on either side to see if any player is going to be able to capture this round, but I don't think that's going to be possible. Let's see what both players played. So over here, I played an ant in this column, I played a rest in the middle, and then I played a locust at this garden area over on the side. My opponent played a snail over there at the stone, and then 2 rest cards over here. Now, the game would be pretty simple if you just played numbered cards on either side until someone hit that capture target value on the bottom of the area card. But of course, I'm not mentioning what's on the bottom of each of these bug cards as well. Let's take a look at the ant card. We're going to talk more about this ant card in a little bit, but you'll notice it has an ability down here. This ability tells you that you're going to need to have leaf energy present at this area in order for this ability to happen. And as you can tell, there's no leaf there. So the ant will not be able to use its ability this turn. The snail ability, however, says, and you can tell I had to change this recently, snail ability says that you get +1 for each rest you played. Well, we can tell on their opponent's side that they played 2 rests this turn. Even though the snail is only a 5, the snail is going to get +2 at this area since they played 2 rests on their turn. So that's what I'm going to grab from these numbered cards over on the side. We can now tell that this player has 7 power at the stone, whereas this player, aka me, I only have 2 power. This stone, however, is still not captured this turn because the stone's capture target is a 9. And before we talk about the rest, let's talk really quickly about this area down here. The locust is a really simple card. It's a 4, it's a leaf card, but if it's played at an area that has flower energy, it's going to get +2. You can tell by looking at the garden card that the garden has flower energy, so the locust is going to get +2, just like the snail did. So it doesn't look like any of the areas are going to get captured this turn, but let's check out our rest cards. The rest card is really simple. It just says, draw 1. Unlike the other cards, the rest card goes back to your hand after you play it. They don't actually stay at the areas like the bugs do. And in fact, the rest card is one of the only ways to get more cards into your hand. This means that since I played my ant and my locust on this turn, I only have an ant to play next turn, except for the fact that I played a rest. So now I get to draw 1 from my personal bug deck. I drew a butterfly. Butterflies allow you to recruit. That's how you get more bugs out of that other recruit deck up there. My opponent will draw 2 and then take their rests back into their hand. And so we go back to our hands, pick new cards, and do it all over again. So I've advanced the game by a few turns a little bit. Let's pretend that we've been playing for a couple turns. So I can show you one more thing that's unique about the game here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reveal the card that I've played in the middle here. In that middle area, I played a butterfly. Right now, though, the butterfly has a problem because it needs a water in order to use its ability. And as you can tell, where I played it only gives me dirt, the trash can. However, and this is one of the things that's unique to Bugfight, I think, in the lane battler genre, it can reference one of the bugs that were played before. So on an earlier turn, I played this pill bug. The pill bug was able to draw 2 into my hand, but now that I'm playing the butterfly on top of it, the butterfly can kind of quote unquote use the water that the pill bug brought into this lane earlier and still use its ability. And I should say, if a bug is played in a lane and it doesn't have the energy it needs to activate its ability, nothing happens, but you still get to use their power towards capturing that lane. But as you can tell, a bug played previously in that lane can give energy to a bug played later such that they could still activate their ability. This is going to happen a couple other times with the cards that we've played, so let's check that out. Let's take what my opponent did over here at the garden as an example. So, earlier they had, like me, played a locust and gotten +2, but now they're playing an ant. This is great because the ant is going to be able to use the leaf from the locust earlier in order to activate its ability, but you'll notice it says +5, which is a lot, if you played another ant this turn. Well, luckily for them, they did. There's an ant up there, so they're going to be able to get +5. Let me go ahead and add that to their lane. So now they have a lot of power at this lane. 3 + 2 + 2 + 4 + 2, I think that equals 13. So they're very close to being able to capture the garden, which is nice because the garden is worth a lot of points at 6. But let's look up here at the stone. So here at the stone, I've played a butterfly, but that butterfly doesn't activate because there's no water in that lane. On this side, even though they played another ant over here, there's no leaf on this lane in order for the ant to activate its ability. Ultimately, though, that won't really matter because even without activating its ability, that ant gives this lane 2 more power. Add that to 7 and you get 9, which is the stone's capture target. This player over here, my opponent, will be capturing the stone this turn. When that happens, we give them that area card, we draw a new one, and any bugs that were at that area and any power cards that were there go back to that player's discard. And like I mentioned earlier, players pick their rests back up into their hand and a new round begins. The last thing I should mention is that area cards have their own effects written on them as well. They do a bunch of different things, but let's just look at the stones, which my opponent just captured really briefly. It says, at the end of the game, if you own more stones than your opponent, each of your stones is worth 5 victory points. So stones are great, but there's a lot more of them in the area deck, and you need to be able to get more than your opponent for them to be worth as much as they can be. There are a few other minor rules, but really that's it. And that's one of the restrictions I gave myself when setting out to design this. I wanted it to be quick to learn, I wanted it to be quick to play, hopefully under 45 minutes if I could. And I wanted to limit the components to just cards. No dice, no board, no tokens of any kind. There are 2 things that I think I really like about this design so far, and that playtesters have gravitated to as well. I like this energy system where a bug played on an earlier turn can actually activate the ability of a bug played later. I think that's fun. It creates an interesting puzzle where you're looking at your hand and saying, well, I need an energy type on the board now, so I'll play this one bug and hopefully that can activate this ability that I'll need later in a later turn. The other thing that I'm not talking about is how you can recruit bugs from this deck. These bugs have wildly different powers from the ones that you start with, and it kind of creates a fun deck building game every time you play because you end up with about 5 or 6 of these in your deck by the end of the game. Your opponent doesn't really know what you have, and they synergize in interesting ways with the other bugs. But even with those things that I like, I don't know that it's unique enough from other lane battlers to really separate itself, designate itself as something worth picking up over one of those others. Also, I'm a little afraid of it having a bit of an identity crisis. I'm trying to make a game that's both strategically deep and interesting turn to turn, but also pretty breezy that you can pick up and put down on the table and play on a lunch break. Yeah. One hope that I have is that by working on the art, well, I should say this is not the art for the final product. This is all just a bunch of PNG and vector art I got off of Google. My hope is that when I get the actual art on the cards and when this starts to look a little bit prettier, that it will also designate itself from other lane battlers because the tone that I'm going to go for is really not self-serious. It's kind of childish and sketchbook-ish. So if you think it's too much like other lane battlers, please shout me out in the comments and show me some hate. But I'd like to get back to what I was talking about at the very beginning of the video, which is that I don't think this design is quite fun enough yet, and I don't know exactly what the problem is. To explain what I mean, I want to go on a little walk, and I want to take the ant with me. I'm in Tennessee, and it's July, and it's hot. So, remember the ant? The ant sucks. Every time I've played the game, I don't want to play an ant. Every time I've seen playtesters play the game, they don't want to play an ant. And I think that's partly because the ant's really contingent. It actually has 2 success conditions. The first thing is you have to play it where there's a leaf energy. And the second thing is you have to play more than 1 ant on that turn. So it becomes essentially this card that's really weak. It's only a 2. And then to get any kind of use out of it, you have to plan way ahead, which Bugfight is not really a game about planning way ahead at this point. Tuck this bad boy in there for now. I don't really use my shirt pockets that much. Sorry, I just do better thinking when I'm walking. So as a designer, of course, my first thought is, okay, so I need to rebalance the ant. I need to think about its power value. Maybe it needs to be higher than a 2. I need to rethink its ability. Maybe it needs to do something else than rely on other ants. But that's not really the problem I want to talk about. Because there's a problem that's actually much more insidious than that, which is the whole time that I'm thinking about this ant card problem, and of course, this is not the first time this has happened, but every time it does happen, every time I go back and have to rethink a card, or as is usually the case, a whole group of cards that just aren't that fun to play, the whole time I'm thinking about rebalancing, I'm thinking maybe this isn't a balancing issue at all. Maybe this is a problem with the fundamental system, the fundamental game that sits underneath this thing. I guess by way of analogy, you could think of like an interior decorator. They go into a room, they're really good at color theory and picking out throw pillows for a sofa or whatever, painting the walls. But then they get into a room that's just so ugly with all these jagged angles and bad feng shui that they eventually have to say, you know what? There's no way to make this space look beautiful. You have to just gut this room and start over at the studs. That's kind of what I'm thinking every single time I have to do this rebalancing thing, which is there are a lot of systems at work in this game. I don't know that this ant card being balanced is going to make this game fun all of a sudden. This is what I'll call an ant hole problem, which is essentially I'm working on a higher order problem than where the real issue lies. The skeptic in me is always whispering something in the back of my head like, well, you could get better card designs if the underlying systems and grammar of the game were a little bit better. For example, what if the idea that some bugs have energy that they give to other bugs in that column is just sort of a flawed concept? It's clunky. It's ultimately not going to be that fun. Yes, it works for a few different card designs, but if you want 30 bugs in your game, it just is not going to make it. Or maybe even more dangerously, the game you're trying to design is just too minimal. There's not enough information on the cards. The areas don't do enough interesting things. And so when it comes time to design different bugs like the ant, there's just not enough for them to do such that every single bug can have an interesting interaction when it hits the board. It's nice. I mean, I guess at some point I just have to stick with whatever system I've got in place and try to design cards that sit on top of that system and do interesting things. Because I don't know that I'll ever really be free of that fundamental question. That question that's always whispering in the back of my head, always asking, hey, but what if you went and redesigned something more fundamental? What if you went down a layer from balancing a card and instead looked at the information that's printed on a card, or the kind of statistics or currencies or energy types that are in this game, and rethought the whole thing from the ground up again? I have some sense that that's a spiral, and that I have some vague sense that that line of questioning never really stops, and that once I have some system in place, I have to start working on higher order designs in order to get the game finished and get it playable. I've never really seen anybody talking about this kind of problem, so maybe it's just me, but I don't think so. I'd imagine that kind of insecurity and that kind of questioning happens to any game designer that's balancing cards on top of a system that they built in the first place. And I should say that maybe that stands as a model for the whole process and the insecurity that comes along with all of it. Nobody's asking me to be a game designer. And even the people that do believe in me, they don't know that I'm going to make a successful game. They just want to be nice to me. So I guess all of it comes down to me just saying, we're just going to run with it. We're just going to go with what we got for right now.